In this video, I will cover 4 different topics. 2 of them are related to taxes and the IRS, then a topic about the banks that appear to be white hat controlled at this point, and finally, Q operation going mainstream. So to begin with, lately on Twitter, we have seen a lot of people posting about a tax revolt. And some of the people posting are large accounts. Other people posting are quite significant people like General Flynn, also Marjorie Taylor Greene. I believe that this tax revolt movement has been intentionally started by the white hats. The reason I believe this is because people like General Flynn and Marjorie Taylor Greene are white hat operators, and you will not see them just doing random bullshit. They're not flying by the seat of their pants. They are working for the operation. And so when you see them doing something, especially if they're both doing it, and then you see a lot of large accounts on Twitter also doing this, talking about not paying federal taxes this year, this, I believe, is clearly coming from the white hats.
Absolutely massive news. So some pretty wild things are coming out of this fallout from Nick Shirley's massive expose in Minnesota. And this one is extremely interesting because now we're seeing what appears to be the early stages of a nationwide tax strike starting to brew.
Why do we pay taxes when our government won't notice millions, perhaps billions of dollars being fraudulently siphoned through businesses that in broad daylight are clearly not legitimate businesses? And yet, if I don't pay my little tax bill, the IRS is going to be on my tail. And at the same time, you've got the Pentagon failing its 8th audit. It has never passed an audit in the history of audits being done on the Pentagon. And defense spending is one of our biggest national budget items. America fought a revolution after a 3% tax rate was imposed on the colonies. And yet today we have roughly a third or more of our income taken away, only for vast amounts of it to just go totally unaccounted for. Our government taxes us to death, and because they're so unaccountable and so inefficient, they still don't make their annual budget. They still spend more than they taxed us, and then they have to go and print more money, which devalues the money that we do have left over. People are not outraged enough about this.
Somewhat before all the posts about tax revolt came out, Marjorie Taylor Greene had already started talking about how all of us should just stop paying taxes, and talked about the entire government screwing us over.
Because the federal government has fucked you over. It rapes you every single day. They are so powerful. They could rein in their government like that. Not only could they rein it in, they could overthrow it. And
How could they do that, though?
I'll jump way out there. We're going to make all kinds of headlines. Let's say 100 million Americans that say, fuck you to the government and refuse to pay their taxes.
You file exempt.
So given that in 2020, a lot of us woke up to the fact that our nation is run by a global crime syndicate, I believe the white hats knew that many of us would just want to stop paying income tax because we were so angry that even back then, before all the fraud was revealed, we understood that this crime syndicate was preying upon us and stealing from us and had been doing so for our entire lives. So I and many other people stopped paying all income tax, both federal and state income tax, as of the 2020 tax year. The last year I paid any income tax for was 2019. So for 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, and 2025, I have not paid any federal or state income tax. Now, because I believe the white hats knew that many of us would do this, I believe they started dismantling the IRS early on, and there were many indications of this, and I'm going to present some of this information here. So I wrote this article several years ago about revoking your election to pay federal income tax and state income tax. And at the time, I was a state national, and I believed that you could use common law remedies to get out of various cabal systems. I learned fairly quickly that this was not the case. However, this revocation of election to pay federal income tax has basically worked for everybody. A few people have gotten letters that state that they're doing this process is frivolous. But for the most part, none of us have heard from the IRS at all, other than to just acknowledge that they received our correspondence and we don't need to do anything. Now, this is, in my opinion, this is not because any kind of common law remedy works. It is because the White Hats are dismantling the IRS. And let me go and show you some of my posts that provide evidence of this. So we have seen several articles indicating that the IRS is cutting its staff and lost its auditors, and that it's closing many offices. Okay, here's one article about the IRS losing its workforce. And let's look at another one. IRS lost 30% of its tax auditors in a Dodge downsizing. And then we have IRS closing more than 110 offices. And then we had a new IRS commissioner appointed for a while. He didn't last too long, but Billy Long was appointed IRS commissioner, and he was somebody who had previously talked about shutting the IRS. Trump has many times talked about closing the IRS, and because we're going to have enough money for the external revenue service, namely the tariffs. Here is something very interesting. The IRS bracing for a $500 billion drop in revenue as taxpayers skip filings. Here we go. This is this article here. And then we had posts like from Dan Scavino saying abolish the IRS. And we had Scott Bessent calling to abolish the IRS.
Think about it. Donald Trump announces the External Revenue Service, and his goal is very simple. His goal is to abolish the Internal Revenue Service and let all the outsiders pay.
Do you believe at some point in time we could find a way, once the country's back on its feet and getting enough revenue and paid off our debt, do you think it's possible to find a way to eliminate federal taxes?
There is a way. There is a way. I mean, if what I'm planning comes out, it's a great question, by the way.
Everyone could attain their
pretty sophisticated.
And, I have a real shot. We're taking in tremendous amounts of money. The answer is, I think there's a real shot. I actually say there's a shot at, we have the Internal Revenue Service. We could use the External Revenue Service, and we wouldn't even need the Internal Revenue Service.
Can we reform taxes to eliminate the need to file?
Well, it's possible. If the tariffs work out really well, you wouldn't need income tax. You know that. If tariffs work out well, our country at its richest was during from 1870 to 1913. That was the richest, and we were an all-tariff nation.
And it's possible we'll do a complete tax cut, because I think the tariffs will be enough to cut all of the income tax.
So if we read between the lines as regards all of these articles, what are they communicating to Americans? They're basically communicating to us that the IRS is weak. It's been more and more weakened. It's losing people. It's losing auditors. And especially with this one article that the IRS is bracing for a $500 billion drop in revenue as taxpayers skip filings. This article in particular is very clearly saying to Americans, you are a schmuck if you continue to pay taxes when so many other people have just stopped sending in money to this corrupt government. So I believe with articles like this and all this messaging, the White Hats are very clearly telling us we don't need to keep paying federal income tax. Now, if they are telling us that, then obviously it follows that we are not going to get in trouble for doing that, because this is not something that the White Hats do. They don't encourage us to take certain actions only to get ourselves in big trouble. They do not do that. Now I want to share a couple other things. Here's a clip from a recent News Trees and Dave show where a man shares a story about how he was told directly by an IRS agent that the IRS is running on a skeleton crew.
Just a little inspiration for everybody. And this is a true story because it firsthand happened to me. 2019 had a amended return, so that would have been in 2020. And I filled it out, waited through the COVID years, right? So it got to be almost the third year. And after the third year, you can't get your money back. So I kept trying to call, got in finally, talked to an IRS agent, and was inquiring what was the holdup and why. And I explained to him, if the shoe was on the other foot, you guys would be taking my house and everything else. She said, well, sir, I'm really sorry. The only thing I can say is we're a skeleton crew. I said, what do you mean skeleton crew? I thought you guys had another 80,000 people coming in there. And she says, well, sir, just about every IRS building in the United States has been permanently shut down. And this was in 2022. So everything has happened. This has all happened already. I think we're running parallel as things are coming out. Everything's already been done, or it's still in progressive timeline to keep going.
Also, I recently saw this post on Twitter where a man said that he was audited by the IRS for his 2022 taxes, and the audit was progressing rather aggressively until all of a sudden the IRS just inexplicably closed the audit. Okay, so this is what you would expect if the IRS is being dismantled. Now, I do want to point out that some people have lost against the IRS recently, and some of them have lost very big, including Anna von Reitz, who is Anna Marie Reisinger, who runs the American States Assembly and claims that she is running the legitimate government. So some people may think, well, the IRS is obviously not being shut down if they're still doing things like this. And they seized from her an entire property in Wisconsin. At that point, she owed over $1 million in federal income tax to them. But, okay, we got to keep in mind, when did her case start? Her case started in 2002, and her case was involving these years, 2002 to 2009, so very early. And this is before Trump became president. This is before the White Hat started closing down the IRS. So you could understand the difference here. Some people are not hearing from the IRS at all when they just stopped paying federal income tax, yet she was aggressively targeted. She was billed a total of $1,174,000 in back taxes as of November 2023, and they eventually seized her property in Wisconsin over this. Here is the IRS seizure of her property in Black River Falls, Wisconsin. The fact that the IRS is aggressively pursuing early cases that started a long time ago does not mean that they are going to aggressively pursue every case. And in fact, as we've seen, so many people in recent years have just stopped paying taxes and seen no repercussions whatsoever to that. Okay, the next topic that I want to discuss in this video is how I believe the White Hats are already in control of all the major banks. Now, we can deduce this in a couple ways, as News Trees and Dave goes on to explain in this clip I'm going to share, but this is how I reason it. First of all, if the White Hats are in control and they run the government, they control the media at this point, they're in control of Big Pharma, they're in control of the insurance companies, they can basically do whatever they want. There's no way that they could not be in control of the banks, because the banks run the financial system of the world. And you cannot have a situation where the White Hats are in control, but they have no control over the world financial system. That makes absolutely no sense. So that's the first and most obvious deduction. The second is, as Dave goes on to say, that as we know, when the banks were shorting silver early on, when the price of silver went up just a few dollars, they were losing billions of dollars at that point. And we saw the writing on the wall already 3 years ago that the banks were in serious trouble. So by all indications, the major banks should have collapsed already several years ago. There's no way that if they were on the verge of collapse at silver breaking $30 an ounce, that they would still be existing now that silver is at $95 an ounce. It makes no sense. So what we can deduce from this, too, is that the White Hats are in control of the banks. And I believe this is being done so that we have a controlled demolition, not a catastrophe that would put everyone on Earth into financial peril.
The silver going up right now, right? So maybe this is indication that we are right there for something like this to happen, and we're waiting for, hey, the Federal Reserve collapsed, we're going through this bankruptcy, and then after that, then things can start happening.
I think you're making a similar point to kind of what we have. Like I've been saying for a long time. I think the price of silver kind of tracks where the operation goes.
Right.
And it's interesting because if you looked at the short positions without getting too technical of the banks, like they were short when silver was when silver was $30 an ounce. They were short at about $24. So they were already losing $6 an ounce per contract, which is billions of dollars.
Right.
Then we went to 40. Then we went to 50, 60, 70, 80. Now we're at 90. I don't want to completely say this for a fact, but from my studies, now we're in a territory where the banks probably should have already started defaulting and collapsing a while ago. They probably should have started collapsing like $30 ago, and they haven't. So then I go back to, all right, who's actually in control here?
Haven't they?
Right.
Right.
There were a lot of very, very intelligent people that know way more about silver than I do that were saying the red flag was around 50, and we blew past that a month and a half ago.
No, yeah.
And yet, other than one little ripple that we saw last weekend, which isn't really fully confirmed, but rumors going around that JP Morgan, which is the biggest short on silver, had a liquidity issue over the weekend. I still haven't personally verified that. I don't know if anybody has, but other than that, we haven't heard anything.
True.
So now I lean into, which would make sense, that this end of it, the presentation of silver and the banks, that is likely. I just don't see how you could do any of this stuff without having this stuff on the rails, meaning like the White Hats having some kind of control or rail around this stuff. Otherwise, you can't just leave like, well, we're going to do this whole military operation. We're going to arrest people. We're going to take control of the media. We're going to roll these psyops, but we're just going to hope the banks go the way we want it to go. That doesn't really line up with what we've seen.
Given that the number 17 is a very common com from the White Hats, I found it very curious that on January 17th, the closing price of silver was $93.14, the digits of which add up to 17. The digits of silver closing price add up to 17 on January 17th. So in the last part of this video is where I discuss Q going mainstream. So Q is a military intelligence operation which began in 2017 by posting on 4chan. And Q has told us about the criminality of the cabal, the global crime syndicate, and has also demonstrated that it is connected to the Trump administration and the national security and the NSA. All along, President Trump has given hints or clues that he is connected to Q. And these hints have increased in recent times and become more and more obvious. So I call this the Q messaging becoming more overt. So early on, so these are some of the ways that Trump would indicate that he was connected to Q. He would post on his Truth Social Q memes, like this phrase, nothing can stop what is coming, that is directly from the Q drops. Or he would post accounts like this one, which had Q memes, like this phrase, do it Q. So when Trump is posting do it Q, that is a hint, a very strong one, that he is connected to Q. Here's another one. He posts this account saying, remember your oath. That is another phrase from Q. There's also been other people that have posted an increasing number of Q memes, and one of them, intriguingly, is Kirill Dmitriev, who is a special envoy to Russian President Vladimir Putin. And he has posted Q memes as well, like this one, with the phrase, trust the plan, which is very much connected to the Q drops, and it contains the Q plus, which refers to President Trump. And then he has this other Q meme that he posted, TikTok, again, the Q plus, referring to Q and to President Trump. Then we saw the Department of Labor start posting Q phrases and Q memes. Patriots in control is a phrase that comes from the Q drops. Trust the plan is directly related to the Q drops, coming from the Department of Labor. Then we have hold the line. That's another phrase that comes from the Q drops. And these are the Q drops where you see those. Here is the one, trust the plan. Here's the one, Patriots in control. Here's the one that says hold the line. We had another Patriots in control from the Department of Labor. And then we have Kirill Dmitriev posting one word, checkmate, on January 13th. And it just so happens that January 13th, 2018, Q posted a drop with one word, checkmate. This is not a coincidence. Then on January 17th, which is a Q day because it's the 17th day of the month and Q is the 17th letter of the alphabet, we have Kirill Dmitriev again. This time he posts a screenshot of a Q drop, drop 552, which says a storm is coming. Then on January 18th, Kirill Dmitriev did several Twitter posts where he referred to President Trump as Daddy. He says, panicking Starmer calls Daddy's tariffs completely wrong. He says, Dear Ursula Pfizer von der Leyen, do not provoke the Daddy. And then he says, Trump slaps 10% tariffs on la 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 la. Europe should not provoke their daddy. And then he does a final one. Europe should just listen to daddy and not promote unrealistic resistance. What does this mean? Well, daddy is an affectionate term that anons sometimes use for Trump. We call him boss man, we call him daddy, we call him papa. He has another parody account he and the White Hats used called Poppy Trumpo, which is, the word poppy is in there, papa. Now, this relates to the fact that Trump is a big figure in the Q operation. He's a high-level figure in the Q operation, and in a way, he is not a literal king, but in his role in taking down the global crime syndicate, he is a kind of a king. He is a symbolic or metaphorical king. And he's the daddy of them all. There's no one in the world like President Trump taking in a role as big as his in taking down the cabal. Now, there's other evidence that has come out where we're seeing increasingly that Trump is doing things that just could not be done in a normal situation. And I believe that these are hints to the normies that something is afoot, that things are not quite what you think, that there's something else going on. For instance, Trump talked about developing a health care plan that involved health insurance companies dropping rates significantly or even being sidelined altogether. Now, how could he do that? Would insurance companies just say, okay, let's drop all our rates? No, they would not. So there's an indication there that Trump has a kind of control that ordinary factors do not explain. Then Trump posted this saying that American public is no longer going to be ripped off by credit card companies charging huge interest rates, so that he is going to call for a 1-year cap on credit card rates of 10%. So anybody looking at this would have to realize he has no authority to do that. A president cannot dictate the actions of independent businesses, banks. He can't do this, but he is doing this. So that should lead the normies to wonder what is going on and to start to realize maybe there are things going on behind the scenes that I don't know about. So this is a way of Q going mainstream. It's a way of suggesting that there are things happening that there are other things factoring in, because this cannot be explained by the normal situation of a normal government. Another way is Trump made a post where he's going to do an executive order for a broadcast window for the Army-Navy team, a football game. He can't do that. A president cannot do an executive order that dictates that news stations do something with their broadcasting. That makes no sense. Unless there's something going on behind the scenes. So again, this points to something going on behind the scenes. Anons know why these things are happening. We know that in the case of the credit card companies, these banks that these are associated with are all criminals. So these banks have been seized quite a long time ago by the White Hats because they were running criminal organizations. They're part of the cabal. Same thing with the news stations. They're all criminals. All the news stations have been seized by the White Hats because they're criminals. So this kind of a post goes a little further to suggesting to the normies that something else is involved other than what they have understood so far. And, some people will say, well, obviously these things show Trump is a dictator, right? Because he's doing things that he doesn't have any lawful right to do. So that's what a dictator does. If people are saying that, they are not getting the concept, which this post does very well to explain. Let me just play this here.
This right here was very interesting. Y'all check this out.
Is Trump a dictator or not?
Trump isn't a dictator. He's the wrench in the machine that the real dictators built. While global elites tighten control through media, money, and tech, he's using their own system to expose and collapse it from within. He didn't seize power. He shattered their illusion of it. They call him dangerous, not because he's breaking laws, but because he's breaking control loops. This isn't tyranny. It's the most strategic rebellion against tyranny we've seen in our lifetime. Why Trump isn't a dictator. A dictator silences opposition, expands state control over life, controls media to suppress dissent, uses fear to maintain obedience, consolidates power, and never lets go. Now let's look at Trump. He didn't silence opposition. He took relentless criticism from media, institutions, even his own party. He reduced regulations, not to control more, but to allow more freedom in business and innovation. He was banned from social media, not the one doing the banning. He returned power to the states during COVID rather than forcing nationwide mandates. He walked away from power peacefully, even under pressure and despite deep disagreement with the election process. So what is he doing? Trump's actions aren't about seizing control. They're about exposing control. He's using economic, legal, and geopolitical moves to apply pressure on globalist networks who've hijacked sovereignty through trade, tech, and centralized finance, force corrupt players to reveal themselves by pushing them into reaction, negotiate from strength, not submission, using tariffs, sanctions, and alliances as leverage, not dominance. Shift power dynamics without collapsing the system, forcing realignment instead of full destruction. The bigger connection, this isn't just about politics, it's about resetting the board. He's operating inside the system, but he's not of it. He's using its rules to expose its weakness and create openings for decentralization, innovation, and sovereignty to rise. That's not dictatorship. That's disruption on a level most people still don't fully see yet.
I have no idea what AI that was, but it just broke that down like a master wizard.
So here's a clip from a News Trees and Dave show where they share their perspectives on these.
Somebody explained to me how he's going to get insurance companies to drop their prices by like whatever he's saying, 50%. Or right, he's giving you the stuff that we know they did behind the scenes.
Credit cards.
Credit cards, right?
Yeah, F the banks, F everybody that lent money, F everybody that decided to sign for the 28%.
Right.
But we're just gonna do for 1 year. Everybody just relax for a second. For 1 year, we're gonna cut it to 10% because I got America's back, bro.
Right. Right.
Come on.
Do you guys remember when he had the pharmaceutical executive hostage video?
Yeah.
And he was talking about, I'm gonna have a meeting. This was before Christmas. I'm gonna have a meeting with the insurance companies. We're gonna do it in the first week. And so we're all thinking we're gonna have this insurance executive hostage meeting, bending the knee capitulation tour, right? And we never got it. If you read the healthcare thing that he put out this week, there's your insurance company capitulation. You want to be a part of it? This is what you're going to do. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. And then I think it was today he actually put out, he was doing the hearing on the rural, I can't say rural, neither can he, rural hospital funding. And what was interesting is in that hearing, he was saying that we're just going to go around the insurance companies. We're just going right around them. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting little nibbit that you just gave us. That they didn't capitulate, so now they just get to get bankrupted.
I think I have the right clip here.
Yeah,
let's see.
It's fantastic.
You know, I'll bet you if I called a meeting of the insurance companies,
there it is.
Companies that are involved with healthcare costs, I would be willing to bet, I think, that they would reduce their prices very, very substantially. We could have fair healthcare in the country. Now, my initial thought, and this is what I want to do as of right now, this is the alternative, is that all of the billions and billions, ultimately trillions and trillions of dollars that's paid to these companies, we're going to pay directly to the people. But there's another way of doing it, and that's getting the insurance companies to ease up and to cut their pricing way, way down and stay part of the system. So I'm going to call a meeting. It could be in Florida this coming week, or it could be back in the White House the first week, not the second or third week. I'm going to call a meeting of the big insurance companies that have gotten so rich by receiving money and really much far more money than they're entitled to.
Everyone look at the faces in the background. Look at their
like
faces.
These incredible, brilliant, responsible citizens behind me, people that love our country and they love the world. I mean, frankly, these are international companies for the most part. I'm going to call a meeting of the insurance companies. I'm going to see if they get their price down, to put it very bluntly. And I think that is a very big statement. And what happened here is the biggest statement of all, because nobody thought a thing like this was possible. And I think based on that, I won't even take questions today, because there's no way I can take questions that are anywhere comparable to what you just witnessed. You just witnessed
I freaking love this guy.
Drug prices that will go down at levels never thought even possible, Marty, right? Never thought even possible.
We never got a public, like, let's rake the insurance companies over the coals, but he's telling you what was already done. And then he comes out yesterday with his plan.
So in summary, I expect that as things continue to unfold, we will see more of the white hats bringing Q mainstream. which none of us really ever expected that this would happen. We really didn't know how the White Hats would do the ending, but this appears to be what they're doing. So this is very interesting times indeed, and plenty to keep us fascinated every day as things continue to unfold.